to Figuring Out Families by Magellan Media, where we help make families the best they can be. We're pleased to be joined by marriage counsellor and family expert Derek Boylen for what we are calling the Focus Sessions, aimed at helping families with relationship issues. Together with Derek, over a number of these sessions, we will explore the most pressing issues facing families today. We hope you enjoy and find this series valuable. Money, as they say, Derek, makes the world go round, but for many families there's not enough to go round, and that can lead to problems in relationships, you'd agree.
Yeah, it sure is, David. It's probably one of the most difficult things for couples to talk about, and we know because it's reflected in the research. You know, what we know is that less than 10% of couples actually have a budget and would be able to sort of say, well, this is how much money we have coming in and going out, and that's because they don't talk about it. It's difficult to talk about.
Yeah, no, exactly. And look, it's a good time to talk about financial pressures on relationships, especially with the coronavirus causing massive job losses and so much hardship to business. But even in normal times, Derek, money is a stressful issue for couples. It seems to be one of those perennials.
It sure is. And couples really do struggle with knowing how to have a conversation about it that's going to be helpful in their relationship. And so, but there are some practical tips that can help with that.
Okay. Is there any one thing that leads to arguments over money? Is it a whole gamut of things?
Look, I think it is a lot of things, but I suspect that one of the biggest issues for couples is actually that often when they come to a relationship, they come with different money, what some people refer to as money habitudes. So certain habits, ways that they sort of think about money and spend money. And these sort of ideas have developed over time for them as individuals. And I guess we all have money habitudes. I mean, for some people, money is about long-term sort of financial stability. I earn money so that one day I don't have to earn money and my family will be taken care of. And I guess people with that mindset, they will, put a lot of money aside and they'll invest money and they'll try to make, financial investment decisions when they think about their money. But for other people, money is about social status. It's I earn money so that I can pursue the kinds of interests and sports and hobbies that I am interested in, and I can spend time with people who share those ideas and values and interests with me, and that's the way that they think about money and the way they prioritize money. For other people, money is about charity. It's about how can I make a difference in other people's lives, and they've got 30 World Vision children and 50 cats, and they donate to everyone, and that brings them happiness and fulfillment. And I guess who's to say which is the right way necessarily to spend our money? But in a couple relationship, you have two people who come together with different habitudes about money, and often that results in some difficult conversations about what we should be doing with our money and how we should be prioritizing the spending of it.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And Derek, are we to a large extent shaped by our upbringing and how our parents dealt with their finances?
Absolutely. I think that's probably one of the first places that I'd encourage couples who are wanting to think about how we talk about our money and finances is to think about their experience growing up. What did they see modeled? What were the patterns that they sort of adopted? An example would be Karen and I, in my family growing up, I have very little recollection really of my parents talking about money. I think my dad's attitude might have been, it's not their money, so why would I talk to my kids about it, sort of thing, so I don't have much of a memory of them budgeting or having conversations about bills and the paying of them, those sorts of things. It just wasn't really on my radar. And in Karen's family growing up, her mum was really the one who made the major decisions around money. She did the weekly shopping and put money aside and decided when they'd invest and what they'd invest in and those sorts of things. And so when Karen and I came into our relationship, my attitude was, well, I can manage our money or you can manage our money or we can do it together. For me, any option was perfectly acceptable. And without us really actually having a conversation, Karen just sort of started, paying the bills as they came in and those sorts of things. And it was probably maybe 6 months into our relationship and Karen sort of says, you like spending our money, but I don't think you really know how much is actually in the account and what's going in there, do you? And I'm like, I'm interested. And so we had an awkward conversation about how will we manage our money in our marriage? And I think that's probably, it's just a reflection of our upbringings, patterns we picked up and adopted that are now being sort of worked out in this relationship. So they are shaped by our upbringing.
Yeah, and sometimes your other half loves to deal with the finances and the other one doesn't, so that can work out well.
Exactly, that's right. That definitely.
Are there signs, Derek, that couples can look out for to sort of avoid these sort of tremendous arguments, if I can put it that way?
Yeah, sure. I think actually one of the number one sort of signs is actually something you just mentioned, which is when you have typically in a relationship, you'll have one person who is more interested in the money. If you sort of think of it as a spectrum of not interested at all and completely interested, they're not going to be at exactly the same spot. So one person is typically going to be a little bit more interested in, what bills have we got coming up and how much is in the bank account and are we going to have enough to meet those priorities and what can happen sometimes, and what the couples need to look out for, is that person, after a while, kind of becoming the money police officer in the relationship. And so the way that they typically enact that role is by nagging. And so, is that really important? Should we be spending money on that? Is that a real priority, for our home and a family life? And, it's not very nice, I guess, for anyone to be nagged, but it's also not very nice to have to nag either. And so it sort of becomes a double-edged sword that sort of, builds resentment in a relationship. And if we find ourselves falling into that place where it seems like one person's the money police officer and we sort of have these sort of nagging conversations, it's probably time for us to sit down and have a proper conversation about money in our relationship.
Derek, do couples generally have trouble talking about money? Is it one of those difficult subjects, do you think?
Yes, I think it's probably one of the most difficult subjects, and the reason it's difficult is that I guess there is very little romance in a conversation about money. Couples like to talk about things that bring them happiness and joy and in their life. But money, whenever we talk about money, most of the time in our relationship, it's almost always going to be a conversation about unlimited needs, hopes, wants, dreams, travel plans, all those sorts of things, investments, and limited resources by which to acquire them. And so, and I guess, it's just that principle of scarcity. It's going to be a difficult conversation. And so I guess the first step for couples is really to really be patient with one another and gentle in these kinds of conversations, knowing that they are kind of tricky. And we both of us in the relationship have hopes and dreams. Our children have ideas, plans, things that they'd like. And we've got limited resources by which to try and achieve those. And so we just need to be patient as we work out the priorities and talk through some of those things. But generally, couples do have trouble trying to talk about money.
Is it one of the big taboo subjects, do you think? We've discussed a few of these in some of these focus sessions, but the money one seems to be like the big one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think particularly in our culture, David, I suspect that it's, for some reason, other cultures are a little bit different in this regard, but for some reason, Australians find it difficult to talk about money. And I suspect that often it's caught up in judgment. I guess maybe a sort of a tall poppy syndrome-ish. Well, you've got enough money, surely. And judgment, and so it makes it difficult for us to have those conversations because we fear risking ridicule or judgment and those sorts of things. However, my experience has been sometimes people will look at, for instance, here in WA, where I'm based, the fly in, fly out couples, who earn, a lot of money for the work that they do often. However, what happens is that their lifestyles grow to accommodate the income that they're bringing in. And so even when those relationships, when they lose work or lose a job, they're struggling just as much as everybody else. And yet sometimes I find it really quite difficult to talk to about it with other people because people say, well, weren't you earning this much? So it is a sort of a taboo subject. But if we don't talk about these things, well, then how can we get our needs met and resolve our frustrations and how do we stop resentment from building up? So I think it is something that we have to sort of push past that difficulty, that resistance sometimes we feel to talk about these things if we really want the relationship to grow and if we don't want this to be an obstacle in our marriage.
Sure. And I mean, we all know that money doesn't necessarily make you happy. There are plenty of examples of people having heaps of money and not being terribly happy. But the other side of the coin is not having enough and it's struggling to pay bills and from day to day. And that obviously puts a lot of pressure on people.
Yes, absolutely. It's and I think particularly with people losing their work at the moment, it's a huge pressure on families and a huge stress to sort of work out, well, how do we have a conversation? And for many of us, a lot of our identity is caught up in money and the earning of money and providing for our family. So it's not just that we're struggling financially, but we're really struggling with the loss of a sense of identity and a sense of purpose. There's a lot of things there, and that's why we need to be really patient and gentle as we talk about these things in our relationships.
True. I mean, there is a stigma there, isn't it? You probably feel like a failure if you can't provide, whether it be the man or the woman in each household.
Yeah, absolutely. I think often when we go into relationships, I think particularly for men, but for women as well, there is a view that if I get nothing else right, I should be a good provider and protector for this family. And so it really cuts deep when we're struggling financially to meet needs.
Yeah, no, exactly. Derek, can couples learn with professional help to talk about money in much the same way they might learn about romance and intimacy, as we've discussed in previous sessions?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage couples, if they're not good with money or they haven't had much experience with money, to seek help from a financial planner, and also to read widely. Get some good books out, and to, from people who are, good at financial management, and to grow their knowledge, develop their knowledge about money and how to spend money, how to save money, how to invest money. It is a difficult thing, but one of the reasons why I also encourage couples to do that is not just for the advice that they get, but if as a couple they are, getting these resources, accessing financial planners and material to read, then what happens is, instead of becoming adversaries, talking about their money and sort of arguing about what the best thing to do is, they become a team in responding to the advice and the feedback that they're getting from, people who are more experienced. And, that's really the biggest step, is to work out, how do we start working as a team around these issues instead of working as sort of as enemies, whose way is the right way. And so sometimes just bringing some of these resources, getting advice from people who are experienced and knowledgeable in these areas, can really help us to start to become more of a team, working together to get the best outcome for our family.
Yeah, exactly. And as with intimacy and other things we've discussed, there's sometimes no right or wrong way, but what suits the couple in question.
Definitely, absolutely, and I think that's really true, because every couple's situation financially is really quite different. I've found sometimes you have couples and they've got they're working in a job where they're paid a regular wage, but other families are working. Their income is based on contract work, whether they are able to sell a house or, get a plumbing job. Other people's, their financial situation is very heavily dependent on the building industry or the mining industry. And so every couple is going to be different. Their situation, circumstances is going to be different. What works best for them is going to be different. And so it's about helping them to start to have a conversation in a way that best meets their needs, and knowing that, what we do is going to be different from what other couples do, and that's okay.
Right, exactly right. Some people aren't good with money. That's right. The importance of producing a weekly or monthly budget would be very beneficial, I imagine, for them. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I've got some tips around budgeting, and
Oh, good,
we might
good.
talk about them in a few minutes. But certainly, budgets are one of the toughest things for couples to work out how to build, how to create, and so. But there are some ideas that I found certainly helpful when working with couples.
Yeah, fair enough. There's a good chance at least one member of each family is good with finances, as I discussed earlier. When couples are just starting out, much like working out the chores, it is a good idea, I imagine, to sort of work out early on who pays the bills and who looks after that side of things.
Look, it definitely can help when one person has a bit more knowledge about finances, or is more comfortable, or is more available. So for instance, in our marriage, for a long time, Karen was the one who really just handled the finances, bills that came in and making sure that they got paid. And then as our family grew and the demands grew, Karen sort of said to me one day, I'm really struggling to keep on top of that. Can you take over that responsibility in our relationship? And I sort of said, yeah, that's fine. And for us, it was about a 6-month sort of crossover period, which is a little bit awkward because the way I do things is different from the way that Karen used to do things, and that's okay. And it was a learning curve for me, because I hadn't done it for our family. And so there were lots of sort of interesting bills that came through, and I'm like, oh, really? We pay for that? Oh, okay. It worked out
Yeah.
for us. But I guess it's really important for couples also to keep in mind that their finances are a shared responsibility, that it's not just, I guess in a way, while within their marriage, they might say, well, if you can pay those things, that's great, and I'll take care of these bills as they come in, or servicing the car, or whatever it might be, that actually nobody else sees it that way. The bank really doesn't care who pays the mortgage, so long as somebody pays the mortgage. The local shire council doesn't matter, doesn't care who pays the rates, so long as somebody pays the rates. And so I guess looking from the outside into a couple's relationship, there's no sort of, oh, well, it's your responsibility or my responsibility. It's your responsibility as a couple. And so I guess it's important to keep in mind that even though at times, for instance, in our marriage, Karen has been the one who, has just made sure that bills got paid as they came in, that it is still actually my responsibility. I still should be interested, and I do need to sort of say, how are you going, or do you need any help, or be available when Karen sort of wants to have a conversation about which bills are the most important priority here in terms of what should be paid first and those sorts of things. So I don't think, yes, definitely, I agree, David. It is good sometimes if one person's more available or more attuned to and good with working with finances to take more responsibility there, but it doesn't diminish the other person's responsibility to be interested and to be a part of the decision making and to be concerned and share that responsibility.
Okay, now you mentioned tips. I think we're all excited about that. Do you know ways of that we can all pay bills easier or with less stress?
Look, I probably don't have any tips on how to pay bills easier, but I do have some tips around budgeting because I guess, as I said, we know that only less than 10% of couples actually have a budget. And I suspect it is because there's very little romance, as I said before, about a conversation about money. So it's awkward to have those conversations. However, budgeting really does bring a lot of clarity for couples, and it helps to get them on the same page. It gives them a way to talk about their money and also a sense of purpose. If we need to realize that we need to do something about increasing the funding that we have, or we need to save more money, and it puts them on the same page. But budgeting is difficult because it's hard to have conversations about money. And certainly I found there's a number of things that can really help with budgeting. And the first is, I guess, to remember that a budget is simply a best guess. Often when couples first start budgeting, they sort of feel a bit sort of blocked to knowing how to start because they really don't know how much money they spend on things. When they sit down and they kind of go, well, how much do we budget for petrol? Well, I don't know how much we spend on petrol. How much would we budget for groceries? Well, I don't really know how much we spend on groceries. How much is that electricity bill? It just seems too hard to sit down and try to work out all of those things. And it feels like it's going to be a tough job that takes hours to do. And they lose sight of the fact that it is just a best guess. It's just an attempt to have a guess at how much money they think might come into their relationship and where it will go this year. And the thing is that the first thing they need to do is just have a guess. And this year, they will probably spend way less on their holiday than they thought they would need. And they'll spend way more on petrol than they ever thought that they spent. And next year, their guess will get better. And the year after that, the guess will get better. That the purpose of a budget is simply just to start budgeting. Just to have a go. It doesn't matter if it's not right, exactly. It's not set in stone. It's just a plan. It's a best guess at how we think we'll spend our money. If you want to be flexible and you want to change it halfway through the year, no one's going to come knocking on the door and say, you didn't stick to your budget, So just to have a go at it, just to have a guess, I guess is the first thing.
You don't have to run the World Bank. Anyone can run a budget and become quite good at it.
Absolutely, yeah. And you get good at it by just doing it and not having to be an expert to start out with, yeah.
Quite right.
The second thing is that they need to make sure that they capture everything that they know that they're going to spend money on, both individually and as a couple. So for instance, I know that Karen and I are both going to get haircuts, and Karen will have less hair cut off and it will cost twice as much. I don't know why that is the case, but I'm pretty sure that is going to be the case. And so we just budget for that. We know that that's a reality. We know that we're going to purchase Christmas presents for one another and birthday presents for one another. And so we sort of work out what we think is pretty reasonable around that, and we budget for that to make sure that those things are going to be covered when it comes to the time to just expend that money. And so trying to make sure that we include everything that we know that we're going to spend money on. And one of the things to keep in mind is also your relationship. Budgeting for your couple relationship. There's I kind of think sometimes about our car. We have a car. I don't expect that I'm going to have a relationship with that vehicle for more than about 4 or 5 years. And yet I spend an extraordinary amount of money on it in servicing and tires and registrations and all of those sorts of things. And yet we have this person that I'm living with that I want to spend the rest of my life with. And if I am as intentional, at least as intentional in my relationship with this person as I am with my car, then I should probably be budgeting for that, and that means, movies to go and see together maybe, or going on out for a meal occasionally, or maybe getting counseling if we know that that's something that we need to sort of talk about difficult things, or doing relationship enrichment, making sure that we actually, because we have a budget, we can commit funds to us, knowing that the success of our relationship is going to determine the success of our home and family life as well, more so than the car running or not.
Sure.
And I guess the last thing I think with budgeting that's really important is to budget for discretionary funds. And it only really works if you have a budget, but to allow for a certain amount of money that we can just spend on whatever we want to spend it on. It's reasonable during the week to, if everyone's going out for drinks after work, to want to be able to, buy a beer, or if you're going out with friends for a coffee, to be able to buy a coffee, or if you see a magazine that you really like to read, to be able to buy a magazine. And, as I was saying before, sometimes when we have different money habitudes, it's hard to value what it is that our spouse likes to spend money on. And if we don't have funds that we can just sort of spend how we like, then that's when we sort of get trapped in these arguments about, was it really important? Do you really need a beer after work? Do you really have to read that magazine? And we sort of get resentful, and we get sort of gridlocked around some of these conversations. So for instance, Karen and I, each week, because I get paid weekly, we set a bit of money, just a small amount aside, which is the same amount for each of us, for Karen to spend on whatever she wants to spend it on, and for me to spend on whatever I want to spend it on. Karen, at the end of each week, does not have a dime left. God knows what she spends it on. It's like the kids are all good. Oh, we're having an ice cream. Sees a magazine she wants to read. Oh, I'm reading the magazine, sort of thing. Me, I never spend anything. I just, I go to work, and I don't usually like to sort of go to the shops. And so mine just sort of stockpiles a bit. But every now and then I'll come across some cool boy toy that I kind of think, I'd love to, have a quadcopter or something like that, and I'm happy to wait. And so that, that money's there. And Karen kind of goes, where'd you get the money from? And I'm like, well, I don't spend anything. It just sort of sits there until, something comes along that I really want. And it's important to have those funds, because what it does is it stops nagging. That if Karen wants to spend over that amount each week, she'll ring me and say, look, I'm down at the shops, and it's 25% off, and I could save money, but I'm happy to take it out of our funds for next week, and we have a conversation about that. Or if I'm, surfing eBay and I see something that's kind of cool and that's a little bit over what we agreed, I'll, give Karen a ring, or I'll say, what do you think about this? And we have a conversation about those things, rather than getting stuck in those sort of difficult conversations about, was that really a priority, and why didn't you think of me when you spent that money? So those discretionary funds, and it doesn't have to be a lot, but just allows us a little bit of flexibility in our relationship that responds to our money habitudes, our tendencies and our ways. If you're a sporty kind of person and you want to buy a new tennis racket, well, then there's some money there for you to save up and buy a new tennis racket. If you're a charity sort of person and you like to donate, well, there's some money there that you can donate to funds and purposes that you sort of really think are worthwhile. Is really important. I guess the last thing with budgeting is that it seems like a big job, but actually, once you actually start doing it, you realize it's not that big. Karen and I, for instance, we do our budget in February each year. Once all the Christmas expenses and everything are over, we decide that we're going to set just one Saturday or a Sunday in February to sit down and work out our budget for the year. And inevitably, it is the very last Saturday or Sunday in February, because I put it off. I'm like, let's do it next week. Let's do it next week. And Karen is sort of like, you know what? This is the last Sunday. We're doing it today.
Got to do it. Yep.
And we get up in the morning, we have breakfast, we make ourselves a cup of coffee, we get out an Excel spreadsheet, and we start to go, and we set the whole day aside. So we're not going to do anything else that day except make sure that we've worked out a budget for how we think we'll spend our money this year. And usually about half an hour later, we're done. It's, even though we sort of thought of it as a huge job, it actually gets done really fast. And then we've got the rest of the day to celebrate and kind of go, you know what, let's, go on a picnic or do something nice to celebrate that we worked out our budget for this year.
Yeah,
and
brilliant.
As a couple, we just review it in August. When it gets to August, we just sort of make sure before Christmas suddenly is on our doorstep, we just sort of sit down and go, well, this is how we thought we'd spend our money, and are we on track with that? And, is things sort of working out? And then often we'll sort of distribute between us, I'll take care of servicing the cars, and Karen will make sure that, the mortgage gets paid as it comes in, and those sorts of things. But often it's actually just those two really clear conversations in February and August that get us both on the same page, that give us clarity, and that help us to feel good about, the decisions that we're making with our money.
Yeah, that's very organised, Derek. I'm most impressed. I can't imagine most couples would do it that way and sit down early in the year and talk about it and then revisit it 6 months later. So that is impressive.
And I think, it's even just those two little conversations are far better than no conversations, right? And us feeling resentful towards one another and bitter that we're not on the same page.
Yeah, and also equally impressive is the fact that you seem to get it done in half an hour. I don't know how you do that, but that is good.
Yeah, it's actually surprising. I think once we sit down and we've sort of got an Excel spreadsheet with the different items on it, then, when I actually look at the, when we actually sort of start to go down the list and kind of go, all right, well, how much is school fees this week? Well, we know we have a bit of an idea from last year. And as I said, it's a best guess. Each year we get better at it. We put aside this much for electricity and we kind of spent more than that. So we need to change our budget this year, and our guess gets better as we go along. But actually, when you're committed to finding out those costs and you log into your account online and you see when the electricity bill came out and, that's kind of about how much it was this year, you can actually do it pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, terrific. Derek, talking about people who make poor financial decisions, sometimes there are underlying themes there, like there could be an addiction, perhaps a gambling problem. That would make it even harder, I imagine, for the couple. What sort of things can they do? How can they seek help for that sort of situation?
Yeah, definitely, David. I think a lot of couples find themselves in difficult financial situations, and sometimes that can be, because of poor choices, and other times it's the loss of a job, but they suddenly discover that they're really in a place where they're struggling to meet their financial obligations and really unsure about how to sort of progress, and it creates a lot of anxiety and stress in couples, and often the first thing they do is they imagine the worst possible scenario: their house getting taken off them, their electricity getting cut off, and how are they going to manage that? I guess there's a couple of things there that are important to consider. The first is that if it's as a result of something like a gambling addiction, they really need to get professional help with that. It's really, really important. Don't just rely on that person sort of kind of saying, oh, no, I promise from now on things will be different. Get help. These are difficult problems to shift, and getting some support and getting some advice from professionals who can help you to best know how to manage that situation is definitely going to make a big difference to start out with. I guess the second thing is that is don't be afraid to ask out for help. There are plenty of organisations, if you in a crisis situation, people like St. Vincent de Paul, those sorts of organisations are very happy to help out and to support, and also have access to services that can provide support when it comes to financial budgeting and dealing with finances. But the other thing is that most providers, understand, they know that couples find them and families find themselves in difficult situations and circumstances. And really, the most important thing that their number one priority isn't cutting off your electricity or selling your house. Their number one priority is actually working out a way that you can pay your bills. Right? They want the money to come in, and so often they're very happy to be quite flexible about working out a system of payment to help you to be able to get on track. If you just ring up your electricity company, or if you ring up the bank and say, look, we've found ourselves in this situation and we're really struggling, is there anything that you can do to help? They are very, very happy most of the time to sort of say, all right, well, look, what can we do? When do you think you'll be able to pay it? And maybe we could pay it in smaller amounts over a period of time, and to be really flexible about that. And it can be very daunting sometimes to ask others for help, but don't be afraid of that. Don't feel anxious about that. It's actually, as we've said many times over this series, it's a strength to know when to ask for help and to be able to say we're struggling and we need some help. And most people are more than willing to help couples and families to work out how to manage those things.
Sure, no, that's good advice, Derek. Now, we've spoken about the importance of money. Would it be a good idea of couples getting down or talking to their children from an early age about budgets and money? I mean, it's not a really sexy subject, we know, but it's so important, and it becomes more important the older you get. So I know it didn't happen with me. I know at my upbringing, my parents really didn't talk to me about money, but it might not be a bad idea.
I think it's a really good idea, and it is a funny irony that I think particularly for maybe our generation that we grew up and parents didn't talk about it, and school didn't cover it, in a lot of depth outside of mathematics, and so we have a sort of a generation that aren't very knowledgeable, except for a few people who've sort of gone on and done further studies about money, about how to save money, about how compound interest works, about the best ways to manage bills, how to handle a credit card. All of those things are important for being able to be healthy members of civil society and to contribute meaningfully to our community. And so I think talking to our children is really important. Letting our children see us having those conversations, see us sitting down and talking about budgeting, and teaching our children within our families as well. There's plenty of programs out there in terms of ideas for structuring pocket money and those sorts of things. In our family, we don't give our children pocket money, but and there are certain jobs around the house that they're expected to do, and you do them simply because you're a part of a family, and everyone in the family needs to contribute to things like getting the dishes done and cleaning up the dining room table and those sorts of things. But there are other jobs around our house where I kind of think if our kids want to earn a bit of money, doing the weeding of the front yard, it'll probably take me an hour, but if you want to do it, I'm more than happy to pay you for that time. And and when our kids get to a certain age, they're expected, if they want to go on youth group camps and those sorts of things, to pay for that, and they can earn that money around the house doing plenty of the jobs that I know I struggle to find time to do, and I'd be more than happy to pay for them to do it. And so that's about them learning how to take responsibility for money. That money is a financial transaction, that I give a certain service or a product, and I receive money in return, and how to manage that themselves for discretionary funding, and also to do things that they really want to do or that they're looking forward to. So I think modeling it, talking about it, and teaching our kids about money is definitely a huge step in helping them to become financially responsible adults and to develop a sense of comfort in talking about these things so that they're not like our generation.
Totally agree. No, that's very, very good advice. Derek, it's recap time. We've come to the end almost. Some of the main points to come out of this session.
Yeah, I guess the first point is that if as a couple or in your family you struggle talking about money, that's totally normal and very expected, and every couple and family find it hard to talk about money. It's always a conversation about unlimited hopes and dreams and limited resources by which to achieve those. Having a budget is really important, so that everyone is on the same page about how much money we think is going to come in and what are the important priorities and where that's going to go. And recognizing that we have different money habitudes, we have different approaches and attitudes towards money, and being sensitive to talking about those things and addressing those needs is key. And then the last thing is, if you're really struggling, don't be afraid to ask for help and to seek support and to talk to providers. People are more than willing to help in this area.
Terrific. Derek, it's been great talking to you again.
You too, David. Thank you.